Welcome to this particular panel, which is going to be looking at game industry trends. I'm joined by Alex Beddows, Jason Ord, Steve Goss and Kieran Goodson. And I've asked them to introduce themselves briefly for probably the umpteenth time today, just to tell us a little bit more about what you've done in the past.
Of course. My name is Kieran Goodson. I'm currently a senior environment artist at the Chinese Room. I've been here for nearly a year, but previously I was at Rebellion when I helped to ship Sniper Elite 5.
I'm Steve Goss. I'm studio director at Supermassive Games. I'm not going to go through the details. It's boring. I've been making video games since 1987. There you go. I'm old.
My name's Alex Beddows. I'm senior environment artist over at Respawn. We just got finished shipping Jedi Survivor. Previously, before that, worked with primarily American AAA studios before working in mobile games and indie games.
Hello, I'm Jason Ord. I'm currently with Facepunch Studios, working on Sandbox, which is the spiritual successor to Gary's Mod. Before that, I spent 3.5 years as an environment artist on Dead Island 2, which just shipped this March. So,
thank you very much. So I'll just get straight into it. This is talking about game industry trends. So the first question I'd like to ask is, how have things changed since you all began in the industry? So I'll leave you to last.
There's an age range here.
A little bit longer. So if we start over here, so can I ask you?
I mean, between us, I've been in the industry for 4 years, roughly. So with that considered, not a huge, crazy jump anywhere in particular. I suppose the most obvious one for a lot of people that would come to mind immediately would be the discussions with AI, how that factors into like art rights and stuff, whether or not we use AI content generation in a commercial way in game development and stuff. It's a tricky topic,
That's
really, and I think
topic we're probably
I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions on it. So,
yeah.
But that's probably trend-wise. I think that's blown up quite a bit recently. Yeah.
I think when I started, I've been in the industry for like just over 10 years, and when I entered the industry, proceduralism, especially for game art, wasn't really a thing. It wasn't definitely not as much of a crutch as it is now. And I remember when Dedo and Endo came around and everyone thought the world was going to end, and then Painter came around and everyone thought they were going to lose their jobs, and Houdini came around and Substance Designer came around and everyone's going to lose their jobs. And the thing that I think doesn't change in the industry is people will always worry about when something new comes along, they get scared and they think that their careers are over. But I think that's probably the biggest change over the course of my career has been the rise of proceduralism. And now I think pretty much it's a fairly safe blanket statement to say most roles in art, in video games, require some level of proceduralism, or at least an understanding of how to implement your art. I think that's probably the biggest change.
That's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, just to leapfrog off of that, I would say even in our short careers of 4 to 10 years, like the tools that we're working with on the ground are changing on a monthly, even like yearly basis. And so it seems like things are moving very quickly. When I first started learning 3D and texturing and stuff, Substance Painter was still fairly new. The whole PBR pipeline was still fairly new. And we're moving away from seemingly primitive applications like Photoshop into these more procedural heavy tools. Moving forward, that may get even more automatically generated. It seems like the fear of losing your job never seems to go away.
There's a downside, I think, to losing touch with some of the older pieces of software.
Well, this is the conversation. Yeah. It's like, you have great shiny new tools that have all of these things that automate some things that used to be quite manual back in the day. And it's always that conversation of, as an artist on the ground, like, should I know the old way of doing things? Is it worth learning that and spending that time? Or should I just use these newer tools to get me further along and develop elsewhere? It's a conversation that probably is helped with more of an understanding of what's come before and the years of experience with that.
It is an interesting question, but Steve, before we get into...
Get my grey beard out, should I? I think everything changes. I mean, it's as simple as that. whatever is normal today will not be normal tomorrow. Will be superseded by something. And you can live in uncertainty. I just think, take advantage of the tools that are available today. But the tools don't define your skill or ability. They only augment it and are the path by which it makes it to the screen. I'm not an artist. I never have. Well, I've done art, but that's not being an artist. And it's the same concern in all disciplines. The rise of AI. I'll go and ask writers what they think. They're terrified. Thankfully, AI doesn't exist. Does it? No, it doesn't. The job of being in the games industry is to be riding the edge of change. And if you can be comfortable with that, I don't think any of the rest matters really. And I think it's never scary because it was always changing.
Yes.
Yeah? It was always whatever you thought was the status quo. No, you just weren't looking over the next hill because it's coming over at you. That's my view on it. Just don't get too comfortable.
Yeah. Bottom line is adaptability.
Yeah. Problem solving.
I think it's right that things have changed right from the very start. When we started out, 16K was a lot of memory. Not a lot of memory now. Was you talking about getting a machine with 128 gigabytes of RAM?
UB5, of course I am. Yeah, I need it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of changes that happen. So on that basis, what changes do you see going forward in software that are really crucial? You mentioned procedurality and you mentioned AI. How important are these going forward and being used? Or are there any other techniques that are on the horizon that you think would be valid?
Just as long as we continue to get tool sets, I think leaning into the procedural realm, of course, but ensuring that it continues to enable artists, because the bottom line is if you can fully generate something like an entire redwood forest or something with immaculate detail, and you have factors for what fauna grows where and stuff like that, flora rather, not fauna. You still want to be able to go in and add context, perhaps narrative changes, things to a very specific detail. And if the tools aren't there to, accommodate or facilitate that, then you're not making tools for artists. You're making tools to create a forest, and that's it. So anything that enables artists, I think, going forward would be fantastic. And a lot of proprietary studios are creating proprietary tools that enable that, exactly that. So. Yeah.
I think on that note of enabling artists, I think we've definitely seen a shift from studios over the past probably 8 years, where we've got they're becoming software agnostic. The tools which are expected. The easy examples are modeling packages. Every studio used to say you must use Max or you must use Maya, or even some would be similar 4D. And there's a huge discussion within the 3D industry with Blender. Blender 2.8 came out, and there's a whole discussion about whether it's industry standard or not, blah, blah, blah. And I'd say as learning has become far more accessible, you're not railroaded into a particular software or pipeline anymore when you're entering into the industry. And of the studios I've worked at plenty of studios at this point where I've used whatever software I want. I've used Blender, I've used Maya. The only time that changes is, there's only so many tech artists who have to develop tools, and we're not going to develop a tool for every single modeling package. So there might be one, they say, okay, if you want tool support, it might be for this one package. But I've definitely seen a cultural shift on, use the tool which is going to get the job done. As engines also get more generic, there's fewer and fewer proprietary engines. Unreal Engine, the rise of that, I have seen. How do you want to make your textures? Do you want to scan them? Do you want to have it procedural? Do you want to sculpt it? Here at Respawn, we've got 4 or 5 different ways to make materials based on the artist. And I think enabling artists, that culture shift to allow people to lean into their strengths and not expect them to handicap themselves by adhering to arbitrary, use our software because that's one we have. I'm seeing that shift, and I've seen artists move studios because of that. And enabling artists is a word I think is very important for how the culture of the industry is shifting.
Yeah.
Especially from an artist's perspective.
It is dangerous though, isn't it? To give a blanket statement of like, studios should be adhering to whatever the artist or whoever's coming on, the software that they use.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just not the case. You'll see it in VFX, you see it plenty of times in games. You know, if you're using Blender and you go to work at, say, Naughty Dog, Sony Santa Monica, where they have systems and pipelines ingrained so deeply in something like Maya or 3ds Max, they have every right to shut the door on your face, unfortunately, regardless of how good of an artist you are, because the bottom line is, especially if you're coming in as like a junior or something, you are expected to know the tools that, you know, they facilitate towards. And that can't always be Blender, unfortunately. It is what it is. But studios are getting... I know, yeah, fight the good fight, honestly. But yeah, I think a case should be made for studios nowadays. They are a lot more accepting, generally, of whatever you may be comfortable with.
How about non-art tools? You know, if you get into design or programming, how do you see software for that progressing, Steve?
I think the goal to keep it simple, to keep it agnostic, is always a good goal. So if you can imagine the games that we make at Supermassive, they're a certain sort of game. We have a tool chain that is, whilst it's Unreal, is bespoke tools to build that. Because building branching stories is really freaking hard. Writing the scripts for them is even harder. And therefore, we have a pipeline that people work within, because that's effective for us. I think that kind of it's about intention. So from a your question is, you know, what's emerging?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that whatever is kind of emerging has to serve that creativity that you want to do, has to serve what you're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not going to pop onto ChatGPT and get a script out of it. It's never going to happen, apart from the legal ramifications of it. The truth of the matter is, I'm an absolute creative fascist, and what I put on the screen and every word the character says is very carefully created. There is no way that, you know, it's that David Lynch, that kind of, you know, Fincher type obsession. If it's on the screen, it's there for a reason. If that bottle of water's there, it's there for a reason. I want it there. I want it lit like that, force telling the story. You try getting an AI tool to behave like that. Yeah. It's just not, there's no point.
It's not logical.
Exactly. So whilst you're right, I think the tools that people use, don't get too tied up in them, because you'll come to a studio like Supermassive and you will have to work in Unreal and you will have to use our bespoke tools. The trend that I think is really important, and I've said this before in a previous incarnation of this discussion, is getting the right people into the industry to do the work. That's a massive change in the behavior of the industry, is looking outside of its normal parameters and looking for people who can make the things we do more interestingly, from a richer cultural perspective, to incorporate values that perhaps a room of 30 slightly plump white men aren't going to have in the creation of software. I think that's a really important thing. It worries me far less than, you know, Mid-Journey being able to make 2.5D artwork. I think that's the real thing. It's the change in focus of us as studios and the kinds of people we want to be. I think that's a big change, and that's only happened. And it sounds ludicrous, but it's probably only happened in the last 10 years or so. We've started to become more aware of who we are, and how we are an attractive destination for people, and how we need to think differently about the doors that we open and our ability to bring a variety of humans through those doors.
Okay, that's cool. Kieran, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because it seems like nowadays the IPs themselves almost are their own cultural smelting pot of developers, and it's not a bunch of programmers sat in a room that all have the same background, same experience. Now you do have game writers specifically for these types of experiences. Now you do have artists who were making costumes for movies, but they've been brought into this project because that IP requires this type of work, and it will require them to adopt the pipeline that is specifically set up to make that type of game, to make that type of project. So yeah, and it's that whole thing of the AI taking our jobs and stuff. It doesn't entirely make sense to me. I disagree with it, because and the analogy I always like to use is the film industry. When smartphones came about and everyone was all of a sudden a filmmaker, a photographer, you don't see the great auteurs and Quentin Tarantino quaking in his boots because everyone's now got an iPhone. You still require thousands of people to come together on a project under one direction to make something greater than the sum of the parts.
So it looks like we're moving toward asking the next question on this, which is, what sort of cultural shift do you see happening within the game industry? So perhaps you start with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's bringing more people in from diverse backgrounds to make more interesting, more creative games that aren't inhibited by the tech that we've all, like pigeonholed ourselves into using. It's the shift from the tech dictating what can be made to what we want to make and how to build tech to make that stuff.
So how do we do that, Steve? I mean, you thought, how do we actually bring about that change? What is it we need to do?
So, I mean, because the kinds of games I think that we make do function in a slightly different space from a lot of other games. We make interactive films, basically. Although that's not everything we make, but it's kind of the signature for Supermassive, isn't it? It's a horror movie where you get to make choices, yeah? And it even has things like director mode and that kind of stuff, where we try and talk in the language of film. I think that space is very much more approachable for people who've never worked in games than going and working on a first-person shooter, yeah? Or a quirky pixel art 2.5D platformer.
It's also probably more accessible for the audiences we haven't attracted yet.
So this is a kind of, I mentioned this elsewhere. There is a moment when you realise that actually your audience is something different from you. When we did Until Dawn, which was I think probably the thing that most people identify with Supermassive, we had these weird numbers coming back from the publisher, where it was like 46% of purchases were made by women. 46% on the PlayStation 4 after its first year of release. What do you mean 46%? Who are these people? They're not in our demographic. We had no idea that the platform was attracting a consumer like, okay. And then there are kind of many, many numbers about how many people actually finish games. But Until Dawn is around about 83% of people who start the game finish it, which is absurd. Industry average is somewhere around 20-25%.
Yeah.
So we were looking at a different type of behaviour, people who wanted a story and wanted to see it all the way to the end. And then we had to ask ourselves, what are the kinds of humans who would make that? What kind of skills do we need? And yes, we need all the traditional skills, but we also need writers and layout artists and storyboard artists, and we need costume designers, and we need production designers, and we need a whole bunch of skills that just did not exist in the industry. There were not people, you couldn't go and say, I would like to hire a production designer and get an applicant from EA as a production designer. There weren't any. So we started talking to people from TV and from film and from theatre. And so we started to change as a studio. The makeup of us as software developers is probably not particularly traditional. It's not as untraditional as someone, say, like Media Molecule, who've made a massive commitment to being a very diverse studio and having a very different makeup. We didn't kind of make a kind of a political process about it. Yeah. which in some ways is a bit of a shame. I think you can be proactive and own it. But as we started to develop, us as a shape, we became a very different group of humans attempting to make video games.
So you reckon that's captured a whole new market?
Yeah, and I think you start to, again, I'm a big proponent of you should look more like your audience as a creative process, because if you've got a broad audience, then having a narrow group of people making it will miss the connections that are required for that audience. So I just keep saying the same things. But that's kind of who we are.
Before we move on, and I'll ask what you think, so I'll ask, do you think it's age? Because I'm not saying you're old, because I'm older than you, I think, but what I'm saying is...
Because I'm old.
Do you think it's the fact that you're looking at things from a different perspective?
And I will play the, you know, when I started making video games, it was me and a computer and a flashing cursor, and that was it.
Yeah.
And I had to figure everything out. And almost without exception, the people who did that were people from middle-class backgrounds whose families could afford computers. Yeah, I completely get that, but that doesn't mean that it's always been, I think, comfortable as a who we are.
Yeah.
We're kind of a bunch of freaks and geeks and nerds and losers, the same as everyone else is, really. And we kind of need to be a bit more reflective of that. You don't go into a theatre and just find it's populated, behind the scenes by 42-year-old men, do you? You know what I mean? It's kind of, we run into a danger of just becoming self-perpetuating because we kept making games for us, and that's shit. Sorry. But it is. It is. That's not particularly interesting. I always take the Stephen King argument of you kind of figure out your audience, you create your ideal reader, and you write for them.
Yeah.
Well, once we'd done Until Dawn and gone, we didn't realise, we went, we should think more about this. We should think more about the humans who are interested in our game, who want to be our characters and invent their backstories and all the other things. We should continue to become more open to allow that audience to find things within what we do. And I think that conversation is a massive change in the trends in the industry, from producing kind of monolithic software, here's Doom, by a bunch of guys who want to make Doom, to for us making a game like Until Dawn, where it was, other types of humans want to play these games than us. And then that's the journey we've kind of followed, which is, we need to change.
Cool, thank you. About cultural directions that you see, sort of in the way in which you approach games and you approach your audience as well.
I think there's been the industry, and broadly speaking, video games are trend chasers. The next, use Battle Royale as an example. Every game is a Battle Royale, every game is a looter shooter. There's a certain industry of chasing the next big cash cow. I mean, one thing that's been very interesting is the thing that's sat there the whole time is story games. Every time a big release comes out, Zelda comes out, or Star Wars Jedi comes out, and it's, single player games aren't dead. It turns out multiplayer games aren't the be all and end all, because all these big games come out with just story based single player games. And I think I'm excited, this is purely from a developer perspective, I'm excited for what that means for the developers as the technology shifts. With we all know The Mandalorian was made in UE4, and assets going up in quality with the UE5 coming out. These assets can go straight in. Video game artists and film artists used to be two separate beasts. If you were a video game artist, you were one thing and your skill set was very specific, and a film artist was another thing. Seeing that line blur and seeing the story games, I can imagine a world where these Last of Us, for example, the next Last of Us, it's just for argument's sake, say it's like UE5, and you're able to make these assets which are just as good. They could go into the TV series like that. That excites me, that you can have games artists and film artists merge, and you get to see your assets get played interactively, but then also get the curated experience of a TV series or a movie where you get to show what you want to show, and you get kind of the best of both worlds. And I'm purely speaking selfishly as a developer, not from a consumer perspective. That is incredibly exciting to me. And I've seen it already a little bit. There's studios talking about, if we can, adopt UE5, and everyone is sort of in that exploratory phase of UE5. But whispers already. Well, if we can, make the assets in such a way, Netflix deals, TV deals, all these sorts of things. That's very, very exciting. It's very new, and that's something on the horizon. Which, again, I'm being very selfish in the way I'm viewing this. That's very different and very exciting for me.
So there's definitely a cultural shift coming in that way, you feel?
From a production perspective, a cultural shift within production of how we view those two industries. There's still obviously room for specialization, but I mean, the guys have briefly touched on it. Having, a bunch of specialist filmmakers came and made the UE5 demo for Quarry. They were all using Nuke and software which goes nowhere near game development. And they made a bunch of game assets in a game engine using a film pipeline. I'm not seeing that up until that point, and that was a huge shift in mindset for a lot of people. That can go back the other way. That's something which I'm very, very excited by.
The Matrix demo.
Yeah, the Matrix demo.
Yeah. Just knowing that we can leverage photogrammetry so much more because the lines are getting blurred.
Yeah.
And photogrammetry is a skill set that I'm like utterly enthralled with. These guys will tell you. I love the process. And the fact that we can take, if we trace back to GDC talk from DICE when they made the first big Battlefront game, they were scanning props from the movies because it just made sense to do so. We're hitting that point where we can represent that accurately with incredible graphic fidelity. We can go to on-site locations across the world and scan where they filmed these sequences in the movies and stuff.
There's certain rocks getting their own webpage, aren't they?
So they should. Rocks are cool. I am for that. Every rock in its own webpage.
There was the Icelandic set that I think they
Icelandic
had, and
set.
there's a certain rock in that that's appeared in.
There is a
new
downside
Wilhelm
to this.
screen is what that is.
It is, isn't it?
It's almost like a little Easter egg of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Finding Megascans assets in the live action Lion King remake. They're everywhere, by the way. Yeah, absolutely. I say live action Lion King. It's not live action, but you know what I mean.
I know that.
Yeah.
We've noticed that playing games. I'm not going to name the games, but we've played games, and there's the Quicksort oil barrel.
Yep.
And I have played games, and we're playing it together, and we go, I know that dent. They just put a different colour. I know that dent.
The red barrel.
And we'll pull it up, and it's like, that's the exact barrel. Yeah, and we've noticed that probably five, 6 different games.
Yeah, I remember specifically bringing in a cliff asset for Dead Island 2 and putting it in the game. And then I went home that night to play Call of Duty Modern Warfare, like Warzone, and it was there. And it was just
even what the film industry's had. I mean, the courtyard in Back to the Future, it crops up in so many films.
Yeah.
You start recognising these things.
Yeah, it does speak to the downside of the mass authoring and distribution of and availability, even in education, of megascans. It can be a problem if you're not using it right or you're using it as a crutch. So you'll just start seeing everyone's work looking very similar. There's context to it, of course. If you're making a lighting study or something, you don't need to make everything in the scene. You just need to make the lighting. So.
Well, I suppose you're not really looking, or you shouldn't be looking at the background. You should be looking at the stuff that's happening on screen, the actual main impetus, and it's the same with films. But that's cool. I think you've more or less answered most of the early questions. So what I would like to ask you all is, if you could remove one recent trend in games, what would it be? It's a bit like Room 101. What would you take?
This is very relevant, actually. So we know, I assume a lot of people here have watched the recent PlayStation showcase. We got the announcement of Marathon, which is a very old Bungie IP. Really cool to see that be brought back as a looter extraction shooter, which I'm sure a lot of you probably aware are quite popular nowadays. And it's to me, I'm worried that we're just taking IPs and shoehorning them into genres for the sake of appealing to the current trend, which is dangerous.
That's cool. Quickly. I'll open it up to the audience in a second. So, if you want to remove one recent trend, what would it be?
Open world games.
Open world?
I guess.
So agree.
No, the trend, a better way to describe it is I wish games respected people's time more. To me, it is not a badge of honor to say it takes 80 hours or 100 hours to complete this game. One of my favorite games recently was Resident Evil Village. Short, brief, I think I got honest, taking my time, 10 hours. And there was no fat, it was just polished, well made, pacing was good. I'm not a fan of games which think it's good to waste your time doing collector side quests.
Following map markers.
Yeah,
That's a good trend. Steve?
Everyone's going to hate me. I really hate anything with the word free to play in it. Literally, go away and just die. It's just like, it's not free to play. It's just waiting to scam me, and it's just going to be annoying. And stop it.
Thank you. And Kieran?
Just to piggyback on what Alex has said, it's that thing of a game studio does something really well, reinvents a genre, a Last of Us or a Warzone for battle royale and stuff. Then all of a sudden, every game studio needs to be that.
Yeah.
I think polar opposite. You've got studios that aren't designed and made up to make those types of games, trying to make those games and ending up making a rubbish game or having to lay everyone off because it's failed. Instead, what I would rather see happen is studios understand their own identity and the makeup of those people and make the game that best suits that, whether that is a 10-hour adventure game where you're a cat and you're running around rainy Tokyo, and all of a sudden you get the riches and the fame because you've been true and authentic to your studio's identity, I suppose.
That's good, thank you. And if I ask a few questions, any questions? And there's one here for you. What's your question?
I'm doing with that one.
Sorry?
I normally give a pass mic.
No.
No, I'm repeating.
Okay. So my question is a bit more on the tech stack side with trending, because I have like enthusiasm for technology, and I've noticed a lot of games in the past, normally the studios would have their own in-house engines or engines licensed from other studios, whereas more recent games are either in like Ogre 3D or Unreal or Unity. And with the Unreal 5 coming out, quite a few studios even looked at dropping their proprietary engines to go to Unreal 5. So my question is, moving forward, are we kind of moving more towards using just Unity and Unreal, or are we going to still keep some of that tech stack of like proprietary game engines?
So the question is, are we going to be more use of third-party engines?
Proprietary engines being phased out.
Our proprietary engines being phased out. So,
I mean, for me, so I previously worked at Rebellion, and this was something that often came up. And I think the answer is it depends entirely on what the studio wants to do. If that studio wants to invest in certain tech or invest in even other studios to go on to do film studios or build a scanning library that can be used for different strands of that company, it may not make sense to make something or to attach all of that investment to an open source engine everyone else can use. Maybe it makes more sense to have your own in-house library so you can have something reliable that you have full creative control over to then branch off into those different projects. It just depends on what the studio is going to then go on to do, I think.
I think it's dangerous because right now, I guess Epic are sort of creating this monopoly in that it's very good in a sense because they're consolidating a lot of features and a lot of things that we would find desirable in our disciplines into one engine. And it's great in that regard. It means that maybe there's a lot of filler and stuff that companies maybe wouldn't want, but you look like you want to say something.
I know, it's just I had this argument recently
Okay.
About this because I think a lot of people, you see on the box it's made in Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
They're using a dev version of Unreal. They're not using out-the-box Unreal, which you download off the marketplace. You're using a version that's been custom built. You've had your programmers rip it to shreds and put it back together. There's certain studios in the UK which still use UDK like as their basis for their engine. There's still studios out there that use the id engine to make their games. When you see made in Unreal or made with Unity, it isn't what you and I would download because that exact issue. I've worked at a studio which did that, use out the box Unreal, and there's so much fat and clutter and just crap in there that needs to be stripped out. Whereas most studios who have been using Unreal for a while will rip out a lot of that stuff and put their own version in. Yeah, it's made with Unreal Engine, but it's for all intents and purposes still close to a proprietary engine. Yeah. You can't distribute that. You can't give that out to other people. I think
you mentioned South Park as an example off stage.
Yeah, Stick of Truth, South Park. That was a developer nightmare for our studio because they could not get Unreal Engine to look that crap. It was so hard to get Unreal to look like that for them. It was an absolute nightmare. And it's the amount of stuff there to break and rip out to get it to look like that. It's you're not using Unreal anymore, even though it says UE4 on the box. So I think there is a perspective, and I do agree that there is a monopoly being built, and I think that's mainly from distribution. Unreal goes to consoles and PC very easily. Yeah. But you look at a lot of the console exclusives. So let's use PS5 as an example. So Santa Monica, Naughty Dog, Guerrilla, they are using mainly proprietary engines because they're going to a proprietary console. They don't have to worry about making sure it's multi-platform distribution. So I think there's a load of complicated factors going in, but I think there is an element of, yes, it says Unreal Engine on the box, but there is so much unique stuff in there. It's no longer Unreal Engine. It's insert studio names engine. Yeah. It's just something that came up recently. I'm not passionate about it, I swear.
I'm afraid I'm going to throw a curveball in there, which is I don't build the cameras, I don't make the film stock, but what I do is make the film. I don't care who makes the cameras, and I don't care who makes the film stock. They're not fundamentally particularly interesting. What's interesting is the content you put on the screen, and what your path to that is, I think, very much down to you and creative decisions you make. It could be Unreal, it could be Unity, it could be a self-rolled, and as you say, almost all of the games you see, even when it says it on the box, have a very bespoke version of that software. But me, I see the value in what we do as not the software that I use to make it. I see it's the output, so it's the content, it's the story, it's the characters, it's that stuff. So I probably have a very different perspective on it, and whatever makes that easier, I'm up for.
It used to be a question of risk. If you have your own internal engine, you're at the risk of not having an engine at all, or it costs a fortune. But those days have largely gone now. So it is. I agree. It's very stylistic. It
is. It's a very conscious decision now. Very conscious decision.
Any other question that anyone would like to ask? Yep.
Not to open the AI wormhole any more than it needs to be, but I just wanted to ask what you guys' opinions are on using AI for tools for the more mundane parts of environment, like root topology and UVs and stuff. Are you guys behind that? Obviously not the art stealing side of it, but you guys okay with using those tools? So
the question is it okay, or what are the thoughts of using AI to handle the more mundane aspects of an art pipeline or any pipeline?
So, if we're allowed to do so, then yes, let's do that. And to spend more time making the fun, creative things that we actually got into doing this to do. We didn't get into the industry to be attached to the tech and care about the brands or the software. We got into this because we're passionate about the games that we were brought up on and the films that we saw as a kid, and we want to have a version of that and be a part of that moving forward. We don't, that's not what we signed up for. So if we can automate that, then great. Yeah, but there will always be an aspect of our jobs that we hate, but we have to do. But in 10 years' time, there will be another boring thing that we still have to do. Of course. And hopefully something then will.
So use it for the boring parts and the fun parts to yourself.
Why not?
There are multiple artists that I work with at FacePunch that have explored something like ChatGPT to make tools for Blender. And let me tell you, if it wasn't for ChatGPT doing the heavy lifting and making these tool sets, they would not have made those tools.
It's how I learned Houdini. I literally was struggling with Houdini, and I'm like, it's hard to find. There's a lot of nodes in Houdini, right? And I'm like, how do I do this particular sequence? And I just tried it. ChatGPT, how do I do this? And it gave me step by step, put this node into this node and this node, and I got exactly what I wanted. And I would normally, trying to solve a problem like that, like a workflow problem, would take me a day? Probably just watching tutorials and reading documentation, trying to figure out how to do it. I had it done in less than 30 minutes.
Yeah, it comes down to enabling artists.
I would say that you mentioned UVing and stuff like that, I would say there is a huge expectation and quality that needs to be met. I mean, it's the same with proceduralism. You can look, the relationship artists will have to AI, it's the exact same they have with proceduralism. Proceduralism can look terrible. It can look generic and crap. It can also, if you put enough time and love into it and tweak it, you can get it to really look incredible. Auto unwrap in nearly any modeling package looks absolutely awful. So if AI can get to the point of unwrapping as high quality as an artist, or at least within a mitigated amount, then great. But it's the same relationship we have with proceduralism. Is if it can get as far as what we deem acceptable, then great, we'll take it. If it's subpar, well, it depends on the studio if they're willing to accept that, and if the artists themselves are willing to accept that. I think it's a quite good like relationship to look at as how we evolve with proceduralism, as how we're probably going to evolve with AI.
Cool. Steve, any thoughts?
Again, this is going to be a different perspective. AI, yeah, no. Machine learning is a really interesting field. The idea that you can create massive data sets and then apply them to problems. As you'll probably realize, stuff we do, facial animation, recreating you digitally. That's not just recording you, that's using huge banks of data about the behavior of the human face. Now that we don't steal that, we don't go onto the internet and just copy it. We have partners who have scanned tens of thousands of humans, and that becomes a massive database we use. That's no different to the kinds of behavior you see in the AI tools that people write in The Guardian and get hung up about. The difference is those tools are based in effort to achieve a result rather than just, yeah, as you said, stealing shit off the internet and passing it off. That's been going on for years. I mean, we've been doing it for 10 years now. So it's not particularly new. That's why I kind of hesitate to think of it as a trend. But I do worry that some of the things we accidentally do might create assets or data that inadvertently come from a source which is protected.
Right.
It's like the code tools, like Copilot. Where does it get the snippets from? Where are they from? Did someone type that? Of course they typed it. That, I think, is a kind of an edge case where it's about improving your workflow and whatever. Inadvertently, you can pile that into your source code. You give it back to your publisher under the contract that says, we will give you back everything when we finish the game. And then later on, you find out that that's a copyrighted piece of material and you can't, that contract is therefore legally not enforceable. That's a really horrible situation to put yourself in.
Got to hurry, Nick, because we're getting close to the end. So just got to ask you one final question, which is, have you got any social media or other sort of web links or anything that you'd like to share with the students here that we can stick up and let them have a look?
Yeah, I mean, I'm Kieran Goodson on Twitter, Instagram, ArtStation, basically all the main platforms you can find me.
I try to avoid social media. Supermassive Games, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on all the usual channels. That's where you can find out things like this week's exciting announcements from Supermassive.
You, Steve?
Yeah, same as Kieran. I'm Alex Beddows. You can find me on social media, probably also under like Beddows Design. Yeah, you search out into Google and appropriate social media, I'll probably come up.
Same thing. Jason Ord on most socials. It's pretty much me. Yeah.
Thank you all. I've got to say now that we're going to be cut off in a short while and then we'll be back in. How long is it going to be before the next one? 15 minutes with the next one. So thank you all, much appreciated, and speak to you all soon.